Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What's your ghost, creepy, paranormal story? Part 2. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. There's a place called Meadowbrook Manor in Rochester Hills, Michigan, my hometown. It's on the campus of Oakland University. It was owned by the Dodge family, and quite a few people have died there, including young. My buddy worked there for years, and my wife hosts events there. I even proposed to her on the property. The house is both beautiful with stuff like secret staircases through bookshelves, but it's also very creepy. There are a few known ghosts, including Caramel Apple Girl. The story is she's a young, quiet ghost that lives in the house and holds a caramel apple with peanuts. Numerous people have claimed to see her, including my best friend, who is a no-bullshit guy who would never tell anyone. He was cleaning up at the end of an event there, and he saw a girl on the staircase eating a caramel apple. He asked her, "Are you okay?" And she said she was lost. My buddy said, "Hold on, we'll find your parents, so come on down." He turned to grab a phone for a moment and turned around, and she wasn't there. He checked the stairs, and the peanuts were there. He and a few others roamed the house looking for the girl. He called me, and I drove over real quick because I thought this was awesome. After another 30 minutes of searching, we finally called the police, and the employees locked the place up. When we were on the side of the house chatting with the university police officers, a light turned on in one of the bedrooms, and we immediately freaked out because that house has been searched for hours. My buddy looks at the two cops, and they look at us, and we're all figuring out who's going to do what. The cop starts walking over, stops, looks at us and says, "F that," because he had heard the stories. He called in a bunch of backup before searching, and apparently there were no peanuts on the stairs when they went in. So I work in haunted daycare. My personal story happened while I worked with the 9 to 18-month babies. At nap time, they all sleep in their own cribs, and the teachers all huddle in the furthest corner so the kids will stay asleep. One day, the kids are all asleep, which is a feat in itself. So I'm sitting facing the room at large, talking to my coworker. As I'm checking the room, a ball that was left out rolled across the floor, just straight up moved 4 feet across the floor. It didn't start anywhere near a baby, and even if it had, they were all asleep. The ball was slightly deflated, and it even sounded like someone tried to grab it. That sound of fingers trying to find purchase on rubber. Now, normally I'd attribute this to a trick of the light or the AC kicking on, but my coworker, who had been looking at me, turned her head at the sound and said, "What was that?" I told her what I'd seen. We had a nervous chuckle, and we asked the ghost to kindly not wake any of the kids. Other coworkers have felt taps when no one is behind them, have seen things move on their own, and one even saw something as tall and abstract to be a kid down the hallway running, only to disappear. For a couple of years in high school, I worked at a donut shop in town. Old type place. They make the donuts fresh every night. All the workers there would talk about how the place was haunted by a former baker, big burly guy who eventually just slept in his car pit back. My shift would start right before the restaurant or front closed, and before the bakers came in for the night. I'd be alone in the shop. The back, where the baking would get done, would get absolutely disgusting. Jam and glaze all over the floor, to the point before I swept, I'd have to scrape the floor with a paint scraper attached to a stick. I was an extremely lazy person. I figured out I could just duct tape cardboard over the really bad areas and make my job way easier, no more jam floors. Well, problem with that was that it was basically cut my shifts in half. So I'd spend the time I'd normally be scraping jam off the floor simply sitting in the front at the counter. Well, one day I'm sitting there stealing time from the suite owners. I see some movement out of the corner of my eye. Looked like someone wearing flannel, walking from the back to the front of the shop, then turning and running into the back again. I thought I had just been caught milking the clock by the owner. I never heard any noise of anyone coming in, so I go to the back to check, and who caught me? Face the music, so to speak. No one there. I was so convinced I saw someone. I walked upstairs into the offices, which I had never been in before. No one. I later asked what the ghost wore when he was alive. Always flannel. I used to live in a one-bedroom apartment a number of years back. One night, I came home roughly about 2:30 in the morning and was exhausted, so I decided to go straight to bed. As I laid in bed trying to get comfortable enough to fall asleep, I heard a rather loud noise coming from the living room, kinda like what would happen if someone jumped off the couch and landed on the floor. I lived in an apartment building on the top floor, so I knew it wasn't coming from below me. On edge now, I continued to lay there listening for any further noise. Suddenly, whatever created the sound in the living room made a thundering dash towards my room. It didn't sound like a person running, more like something four-legged. It was inhumanly fast, and the noise was deafeningly loud until whatever it was stopped on a dime, what I assume was about a foot away from my face. I refused to open my eyes, just on the off chance that something was there. The sound ceased, but there was an incredible feeling of dread and darkness that radiated throughout my room for approximately 5 minutes, but then it simply disappeared instantly and the aura of my room returned to normal. It never happened again the entire time I lived in that apartment, but it was certainly a wild sequence. Last Christmas, I was over at my fiance's place. The two of us were doing homework and just sort of hanging out. During a lull in the conversation, I heard what I thought sounded like tears screeching on the pavement. It was very far away, and given that downtown was nearby, and I'm partially deaf, I shouldn't have been able to hear it. I didn't mention the sound because my fiance didn't seem bothered, so I brushed it off as sound traveling weird in the city. 5 minutes later it happened again, but closer this time. She looked over at me with her eyebrows raised. Again, downtown is close, and we brushed it off as noise coming from there. The next time was about 5 blocks away. It happened 30 seconds after the other, which is way too fast for anybody to travel from downtown to where we were. We both noticed something this time. 1, the pitch was changing continuously, so it couldn't be a recording. 2, it wasn't a screech of tires, but an indescribable inhuman scream. We looked at each other and laughed sort of half-heartedly while trying to still make light of our situation only to be cut off. Whatever was screaming had gotten to the end of our street in 10 seconds. We both jumped into action, started locking windows and doors, and were halfway down the hall to her room when the 5th and final wail sounded. I shit you not, this thing must have been at the apartment steps. We bolted into her room and she ripped an older book off her shelf. I've never seen someone skim through pages so fast. Next thing I know, we're taking protective measures and actively trying not to think about what just happened. A few hours later, with us not making a sound during that time, her mother comes home and we race to tell her our story. It takes her about 10 minutes before she looked us both in our eyes and said, "Sounds like a banshee." I don't know what it was or what happened to it, but that is hands down the spookiest thing that I've ever experienced to this day. My BFF once mentioned to me that her boyfriend could see, feel ghosts or spirits. He's kind of a one-upper, so I brushed it aside and never thought more of it. One Saturday night, we're hanging out at my house where I lived with my mother at the time. We weren't drinking, just hanging out and chatting. Suddenly, he went very still and silent. My BFF asked him what was wrong. He said he felt a presence in the house and it was very strong. He told us to keep chatting like we were and he was going to feel for it. BFF and I returned to our gossiping. A while later, he speaks and mentions the spirit is in the kitchen and it appears to be male, at least to him it does. He says it doesn't feel like other spirits though, more like a good presence or guardian angel type deal. I still don't really believe him, so I start asking questions. He says the entity is definitely related to my family and that he is young. Then suddenly, he turns to me and asks, "Did your mom have a miscarriage?" The blood drained from my face and I got goosebumps everywhere. My mother miscarried a child before me. It would have been a boy, my older brother. There's no way he would have known that about my mother because my BFF had no idea either. Then he said, "Had she named him?" He's trying to tell me his name. It starts with an A. I started trembling. My mom told me she had planned to name him Alex. He went on to explain how he believes it is my unborn older brother and he's a guardian angel figure to my mother. He assumed he was there at that time to watch over her. It was unbelievably scary and accurate because at the time, my mother was going through a really rough time, depression. I never doubted his ability after that. When I told my mother about what had happened the next day, She was sobbing and always thought that the presence she felt by her side was her grandfather, whom she had always been close to, not her unborn older son. I still get chills to this day just thinking about it. Assuming that people are sensitive to the paranormal, would you see that as a blessing or a burden if you had an ability like that? I spent a year living in and overseeing a haunted dorm in Texas that had once been an orphanage. Over that year, I had many paranormal experiences, but most weren't scary. 2, however, were. To start, though, I'll tell you about my first 2 nights there. The first night, I'd come back after dinner with former coworkers. I'd spent my day moving and with going out for dinner. I didn't have time to unpack anything more than my bedding before calling it a night. That night, I had a dream that a boy about 10 to 12 years old came bounding through the front and bedroom doors of my apartment and into the bed where I slept, as though he was saying hi. The bedroom door was right inside the apartment's front door, so from my bed, I could see out into the hallway where an adult male stood. I couldn't make out any features, just more of an impression of him. He stood back, arms crossed, just watching. Weird dream, but just that, a dream. But when I woke up the next morning, both my doors were wide open. Maybe I didn't shut them all the way, though I swore I had locked them. Maybe one of the girls was curious and snuck in, except it happened again the next morning, and I know the doors were closed and locked. I wanted to set that up before I tell the first scary incident. It's important because the floor was haunted by 3 ghosts, a preteen boy, a nun, and an evil male spirit. A fact I didn't learn until after I had been there for a few weeks and already had a handful of experiences under my belt. I had never been good at the whole sleep thing, and at the time, falling asleep often took hours. When I did fall asleep, the slightest thing could wake me up. One night, I awoke with a start. It was like someone had put their hands right by my ears and clapped them loudly. When I woke, I looked at the foot of my bed and saw a tall, dark shadow that blocked part of my streetlight outside, kept my room pretty well lit at night. It made the black shadow I saw seem even deeper in comparison to the other things I could see in the yellowy light. Of course, I didn't just see the shadow. I felt overwhelming hate radiating off the shadow. Whatever it was, it did not want me there. Problem was that in order to escape, I would have had to run to it as it blocked the doorknob. So I did the only thing I could think of that didn't involve escaping through it or jumping out my 3rd-story window. I threw my blankets over my head and repeated the Lord's Prayer until I fell asleep. I did see that shadow once more, in a situation similar to the first. The only difference is that I saw the shadow start to form. It started as a black ball that spiraled out, growing into the shadow person. I handled it as I did the first time, hiding and praying until I fell asleep. I am convinced these visits were the evil male spirit. The second terrifying thing happened on the 1st floor. My boss asked me to catalog what was in the 1st floor's room that were not occupied. One of the RAs went with me, and together we walked from room to room making a list of what we found. Directly under my room was a laundry room, but unlike the one on my floor, this one contained a hallway that stretched back into an S shape and was lined from floor to ceiling with storage closets. As we walked deeper within the hallway, we grew quiet. Everything felt wrong, like if we kept walking further, we would see something horrible or worse. We wouldn't make it out alive, so we bailed. My boss would understand. Upon leaving the laundry room, there was one room left to check. I opened the door into what seemed like a monster storage room. A window on the far wall showed a few outlines of shapes. I remember seeing a bike wheel, but not much else. And the room was so dark, it also felt so close. So much worse than the laundry room. I couldn't bring myself to reach into the gloom to find a light switch. If I had a flashlight, I know I wouldn't have turned it on. The room radiated evil, and I knew that turning on the lights would illuminate whatever was the source of that feeling. So I slammed the door shut and left in a hurry. I have other stories from that year, but they tend to deal with the little boy, who was very playful, or the nun, who was very soothing. My brother passed away on December 22nd at 4:40 a.m. in 2004. I've had a few things happen, like things flying off the shelves or hearing my guitar strings being plucked, but 2 years ago was probably the weirdest. 2 years ago on December 21st, I went to bed around 11 p.m. I usually keep my phone on silent, but I got woken up by my phone ringing in the middle of the night. I saw a number I didn't recognize. Normally I answer anyways, but something felt off, so I just didn't. Can't explain the feeling. I just felt like I shouldn't answer. The phone number left a voicemail, but I couldn't make anything of it. I also noticed that they called it December 22nd at exactly 4:40 a.m. I tried to call it back in the morning, but when I called, it said, "This number has been disconnected and can no longer be reached." Tried to look up the number everywhere, and nothing. Sometimes things are just a coincidence, and other times maybe it is something from beyond our understanding. Appreciate it. Struggling college student with a wife and baby, living in a high-crime neighborhood because that is all we can afford. Record murders in the city that year, with our home near the reddest area on the newspaper's heat map. After going to bed late on a cold Saturday night, the power goes out. Pre-cell phone landline is dead. With the baby, I worry about heating, so go to investigate. Can't find a flashlight. I step into the backyard of the duplex. Cannot see lights on anywhere in town. Look to the side and see what appears to be arms and legs swinging from the power lines that connect to the house. The body is moving with a slight wind, with a slight plasma-like light that can be barely seen. Convinced drug traffickers have managed to throw a body 20 feet in the air and knock out our power in the process, I lock the door. I don't dare leave as I cannot see and do not want to mess with whatever did that if it is still there. Do not say anything to my wife so as not to alarm, but keep the gun handy. 2 hours later, the sun is starting to rise. Power comes back on. Carefully, I open the back door and see a bouquet of mylar balloons that tangled in the power lines. Turns out, the power outage was coincidental. Power went out due to a blown transformer miles away. Still remember the terror of thinking I was in my own with some sort of murdering catapulter. I was 13 and living in a small farming town. It was close to Halloween, so the change in season was in the air. My friend was staying the night with me, but by 10 p.m. we were bored and decided to walk to their house that was about 2 miles outside town. We reached the edge of town, and the last streetlight when illuminated that start of the empty country road we had to walk along. We didn't think twice about anything scary, as it was mostly fields and tree lines, with the worst predator the occasional coyote. We walked far enough down the road that the streetlight behind us was a distant oasis of light. It provided just barely enough illumination to remind us that it wasn't an empty field along the road. There was also the cemetery that ran for a short section beside this part of the road. My friend tried to jokingly say scary things, but their words echoed hollowly in the silence. Just as we reached the end of the cemetery and the tree line that separated it from the fields, we heard a noise. There was something in the trees, and it was big. It was making a lot of noise, but it wasn't thrashing wildly. It seemed to be moving toward us slowly but purposefully. The sound of the dead tree limbs breaking as it pushed past them sounded like explosions in the darkness. That was the first time in my life I understood a deer in the headlights. Even though my heart was hammering in my chest and adrenaline was being poured into my system, I was frozen. The primal part of my brain was screaming danger, but it wasn't providing me with any choices to pursue. It wasn't until a blur of movement crossed in front of me that my full mental faculties engaged. I was able to process the fact that movement was my friend running past me down the road as fast as they could. I decided that was a valid option and took off after my friend as fast as I could. We reached my friend's house safe. We spent the rest of the night theorizing what was in the trees. In the morning, I walked back down the road to town and past the cemetery. During the day, the eerie atmosphere was gone, and in the light of day, I was able to see one of the adjoining fields had a small herd of cattle. For the rest of my life, I've been 99% sure that what we heard that night was a lone cow in the trees. It heard our voices and started coming toward us. But it is that little niggle of a doubt, the not knowing for sure what it was, that causes me to still occasionally think of that night. We have some close family friends whose son died in an accident when he was 12. This kid was incredibly strong-willed and often very mischievous, and he remained that way after he passed. He would often appear to his younger sister, who had been the one to find him after he died. His father was a violinist, and as he was playing for his memorial concert, she noticed him sitting on the edge of the stage. He then stood up, walked up to his dad, and plucked his violin string and broke it in the middle of the concert. The kid loved airsoft guns, and as a reminder that he was around, he would often leave airsoft pellets around the house for the family to find. You could wipe a counter clean, turn around and find a small pyramid of pellets on the counter when you looked again. Soon after he passed, my mom introduced a friend of hers to this family who started visiting the family weekly for a class the mother offered. When this friend was young, she used to see and talk to spirits, but that hadn't had any experiences in years. After she started visiting them, he started appearing to her on the car ride home and have her pass on messages to his mother. She would come back and relay very personal memories that she couldn't have possibly known. This went on for a few months until one car ride home, her infant started giggling and squealing for no reason. She looked into her rearview mirror and saw him playing with, and I think tickling, the baby. This freaked her out, and she told him he had to go. He never came back again. The final, most profound thing he did was a year after he passed, on the day that should have been his bar mitzvah, which he had been preparing for. The family had a memorial that day, and when they got home, they noticed someone had left them a voicemail while they were gone. They played it, and it was the song that was supposed to be played on his bar mitzvah, sung in these angelic, ethereal voices. They kept this voicemail for years and showed it to my family, and it was honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. I have quite a few other stories from when my dad passed as well as some creepier ones as well, but I felt these were the most noteworthy. My good friend shared this story with me, and I've never been able to shake it or retell it as well as him. It's a long story, so I'll just tell you the first part, which I find the scariest. He's about 40 and divorced. Back when he was married with a 1-year-old daughter, he and his wife bought a house and moved in. It was apparently an old house that needed some fixing up, but they got a good deal and were ready for the work. After a week or so, he notices a life-size doll in the corner of the nursery where his daughter sleeps. It creeps him out because he's a normal human being, so he turns it around to face the corner so it stops staring at him. After putting the kid to bed, he goes downstairs and asks his wife about it. "Where did we get that doll?" She looks at him and says, "I don't remember. I assume someone gave it to you for our daughter and we moved it here." He's a little weirded out because he didn't remember moving the doll and wonders if maybe it was in the house when they moved in and he didn't notice it. The next morning, he goes to get the kid out of her crib and notices something. The doll isn't facing the corner anymore. It's looking at him again. I'm getting shivers already just remembering him tell me this. That's enough to creep anyone out, so he throws it in the closet and shuts the door. That night, he has an argument with his wife. I don't remember what it was about, and it's not really relevant. But the point is, they were getting into it a bit, loud and focused enough that they didn't notice their daughter crying upstairs. At a lull in the argument, his wife hears her and says she's going to go check on her, but he just tells her she'll be fine. Let's hash this out. Another minute goes by, and suddenly, he realizes he's practically having to shout over the noise of his daughter screaming from her room. It sounds different. It's not a normal cry. He glances at his wife and quickly starts up the stairs. What he saw when he opened the door literally makes my eyes water with fear when I think about it. The closet door is open. The life-sized doll is sitting next to the crib, motionless, and its arms are reaching through the bars toward his daughter, just stiff and motionless, like it was caught in the act before returning to a doll state. Needless to say, the doll was thrown out, and I believe even burned. There's no explanation for that other than something seriously demonic. The story of that house goes on for much longer, but that's all I have time to write at the moment. So my only genuine question is, if you moved into a house and you found a life-size doll that neither of you remember buying, why was it still in there? Burn it! I've got a few experiences, most at my current house. When my family and I moved in, I was around 7 years old. I'm 20 now. I don't remember how soon after we moved in this happened, but I was laying in bed one night, just about to fully fall asleep when, I shit you not, Something grabbed me by the ankles and pulled me a few inches down the bed. I didn't fall off the bed, but I sure as shit did not sleep that night. Another time, I probably would have been 13 or 14, I was playing Battlefield and fell asleep while the game was still going, and I woke up at about 1 a.m., turned around to get my bearings, and in the kitchen doorway about 20 feet from me, there was a tall, dark shadow, not a transparent figure. It was solid as effing night, standing so tall in fact, its head was crooked against the ceiling at a 90-degree angle. I froze for a moment and inspected it, making sure it was there, and it was there. I stood up with the TV and Xbox still on to provide some semblance of light in the room so I could turn on the stairway lights that lead up to my room. When I went to turn off the Xbox, I looked again to see if it was still there, and it was not. This one's a little more dismissible, if you so choose to dismiss it, but shortly after the last thing, I also was given a dream/nightmare/scarring effing experience by one of the spirits, or whatever you want to call them, in my house. I was on Reddit, r/funny I think. I was new, didn't know any better. On the front page, so I was looking at links that were upvoted aplenty. I clicked a link that had a picture of a girl, young, naked. I clicked away from the picture immediately and felt a knot in my stomach. Yes, in the dream. Though I suppose I probably felt it in real life as well, and saw that the thumbnail for the picture was of something entirely different, like a dog or some shit. I clicked on the link below it in hopes that it would be normal, but I was wrong. My screen blacked out, and just that picture opened on the screen. The words, "Daddy, no," in bright effing red text started typing themselves on the screen quickly, and aiming to fill the screen. Before it could, I woke up. Now, this leads to what I believe is in my house, a father and a girl, no mother, and the father was the type to teach sex ed at home. Thinking about that nightmare still shakes me to my core, and I truly don't think it was something that was meant to be ignored. Among a few other small experiences that don't really deserve full description, I'm confident to say that's what was happening in my house. Obviously, some of you will think it sounds like bullshit. That doesn't matter though. You haven't seen and felt the things in my house. I also had a friend over, one with a connection to occult shit, so had their own experiences as well, who saw the figure in the kitchen doorway, same as I saw, same time of night after the other two of us had fallen asleep. I took that as a solid confirmation that I'm not effing nuts. Bonus, I was at a friend's house. We were in their basement and playing video games, and decided we wanted snacks. Now my friend had their own experiences in their house, so they said we should set up a camera in the basement to film while we were gone, to see if, on the off chance, we could capture something. We set up a Mac with the webcam recording the couch where we were sitting. Upon returning to the basement to get back to the ever-important video games, we inspected the video to see what we captured. The video played for a minute or so before we both heard a voice at the exact same time saying, "Make it quick." Nothing was disturbed from its spot in the basement as far as we could tell, so we don't know what the things had done so quickly, but rest assured, we had no rest assured that evening. With the amount of experiences I've had myself, I am either crazy to some degree or right to some degree, but take these accounts how you will.